All right, so today I'm talking to Chad, and Chad and I have known each other for a little bit here, and we're going to talk about the stuff that typically we want to discuss, mainly what it means to work in a trade and some of the benefits of it, and how it intersects with our faith life and the effect that those two things have on each other. So, Chad, why don't you share a bit about what you do for work?
Well, I I'm a first year journeyman, coming up on my second year, um, tile setter or a tile mechanic, as some might call it. Um, I'm I've been in the Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers Union for mm, about 5 years now, maybe six now. So yeah, I'm a union guy, whatever that means. Um, I uh, I spent 3 years in a trade school where you would go and you would spend every other Saturday you'd spend about 8 hours um, learning from book work as much of in the field work as you possibly could in a situation like that, and as well as being employed by a company that has you actually working in the field. Um, so that's my official path into uh, the the this particular trade. Um, and back in 2003 or 2004, I started in the tile trade, and then because I didn't have a job and my mom's uh, boyfriend was said, "Well, why don't you go and uh, into the tile trade?" So I went into the I hooked up with a company there, and I worked for them for in that trade until 2008 when the bottom dropped out, and then after that I got out of the trade for a few years, for several years actually, and did some other stuff. Worked in shipping and receiving. What else did I do? Um, just other random trades. I was kind of a floater for a while. Did this, did that, um, and then I ended up connecting with my brother, and he got me into the trade of granite countertops. And so I did that for a few years, but it's really hard on your body, and it's definitely a younger man's field. I mean, you have islands that are 8 foot islands. It's like basically a whole slab, and you have to try to get this thing into a building, upstairs, and there's a lot. Um, and so I ended up getting out of that, and I went into I actually went to work for a buddy or with a buddy of mine in the field of auto body. We at a semi truck repair company where you like taking off like entire body of a semi truck and reskinning it, and which I had no experience on any of that stuff, and so that was an interesting job for a while. But none of that really, it didn't really pay real very well at all, and I ended up getting out of that and connecting with another friend of mine who owned a company who ended up his company, they did remodels on bathrooms and kitchens for the elderly or disabled, and um, he's like the first dude I was working with where we would spend a good portion of the days working together. We would go from job to job or whatever, and he'd be constantly talking about God and spiritual principles, and it was great. Um, and that's how I got back into the construction trade. And I ended up that still wasn't really paying as well as I would like, and he even was admitting that. It's like, well, I can only pay it so much, and um, I ended up getting out of that job and was like, I need to do something. I'm 35 at the time, 34. Like, I know how to do tile. I guess I'll go to the union hall, see what they can do. And I was afraid of doing that for certain reasons, but I was kind of out of options. And uh, they put me to work right away. And within a year, when they knew that I was actually going to be staying around, they put me through the apprenticeship program, which was a requirement. It was kind of humbling because I knew a lot of the stuff, but for technical purposes, you have to go through that, and I did that, and uh, now I couldn't be more grateful from where I'm at, and the position that I have, and the security that I have, and all that good stuff. So
Cool. I mean, that's a cool story because I think some of the things that I really like about this kind of trade work, because I didn't have really formal background, but there's a lot of ways where you can get a foothold in the business just because you're willing to work hard, and then you can learn on the job, and then that opens up other opportunities for you know once you have that experience and you know what you're dealing with, if you want to go through the more professional route, like depending. I haven't worked for a union or anything. I don't think there is as many down here in the south where I am as there are up north. But the other thing that is interesting is, so you got a chance to work in several different fields. Not all of them were as lucrative, but um, did learning, like, once you learn the first thing, so you learn how to do some tile work, and then you kind of went to the countertops, auto body, and other stuff. Does that does the experience you have from one kind of help you learn and transition into other things?
well, yeah, I think so. Yeah, what Tyler did for me was it it, it worked really well for me because it worked systematically. You have to kind of go. You can't just go in and like just start willy nilly in some corner with no plan. You have so the teacher that I initially had back in 2004. They taught me um, first thing you do when you get on a job, you set up a staging area. Okay, and the staging area is where you're going to do all your mixing and all your cuts, and where you're going to bring all the tile and all the grout and thin set and everything. Everything's going to be here. This is the first thing you do when you get on a job. So like that's step one, and then you move into the next thing, which is like, um, you know, start doing cleanup or start sweeping the floor. So like what I liked about all this was the systematic portion of that. It was very helpful for me, and I still incorporate that into how I look at a job. So like as soon as I walk into a job, I have my mind's already working on the steps of the job and the order of things. Um, uh, and this new job that I have, it's residential, so that's very new for me. And there are some new responsibilities and things that I have to do that I'm responsible for that I wouldn't normally be in a commercial setting. Um, but still the same principle applies of um, trying to see further ahead rather than just kind of shooting from the hip. And I can't like I can't start laying out one wall and then for some reason start scraping on the floor. You know what I mean? Like, sorry about that. I had a phone call come in. Um, yeah, so you have to work in order, and that becomes really helpful um, for sanity purposes, and same thing with like the uh, when I moved into doing um, uh, the shipping and handling. I'm sure there's things I've learned there that I pulled uh, into these other trades. Speed, efficiency, all that stuff is good. I've always been more of a quality versus quantity thing, so that's been helpful. Working in the granite trade, which is interesting about the granite. The company that I used to work for is the company that we now purchase our granite from, so that's kind of interesting. So I know, and I'm familiar with that work. I can do repairs on it and stuff like that, which has been really helpful, and learned a lot about things that you wouldn't think are that important. Things like siliconing and caulking, all that's really important to do well. And these are just things that are conveniently taken care of on a job. And if you are the homeowner, you'll never notice why is silicone so important. It's like, wow, it's important. And it's important that it looks good to the point, whereas I've heard you mention, if you're doing your job well, you don't even notice that it's there. And that's one of those instances.
A couple things I noticed, like it's really good knowing a little bit about how other trades operate around the space. You know, it makes like that way I can make sure, like if I have to remove some work that somebody else has done, I can try to do it in a way that's like the least destructive possible, so cause them less headaches, and hopefully if other people do their jobs well, it's going to make my job easier. um, and I thought it was interesting too. You did a little auto body work. Because I have a guy, like I think there's just a value in any learning how to use tools and work with your hands. Because I have a guy that started working for me not too long ago, and he's in his 60s, and he had never done any carpentry work before, but he had worked in an auto body shop for a long time, like years and years ago. And it was a little bit of a adjustment, but he was able to basically translate that skill set. The tools are different, the materials are different, but the attention to detail and everything, like he's one of the best guys we have now, and especially when it comes to like touch ups and details and things like that. So, I think that's a kind of a cool thing how, like, you know, you're not necessarily limited in learning one trade and that's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. It really gives you a skill set for learning that you can expand to a lot of other areas. Even even if you're just going to own your own home,
Right.
it's so useful.
Absolutely. That's funny that the auto body thing, uh, the touch that you have, like literally touching the body and feeling like a concave part of the metal that you might have been working on. Remember, you couldn't see it if you're looking at it if it's not painted. So you have to learn what that feels like. Once it's painted, I mean, it might look perfect to you, but once it's painted, you'll see it. So it's interesting. Yeah, I can see how that guy would be one of the better guys as far as your touch-ups, dude, because he's very acquainted with how things feel. Um, that's why like it's funny sometimes, and it kind of off in a different direction a little bit. Is the in the union in particular, there's a lot of safety. Everything is, especially if you're in a commercial setting, it's like you walk onto the new job and you have to go to the GC's uh, trailer. You have to watch a safety video, and it's like, and you have to wear safety gloves and high vis and helmet. And sometimes like in the tile trade, if I got to be making cuts or something, in order to keep the dust down, I want to be using a sponge and water with my side grinder and diamond blade, so I can keep the dust down. And you can't really wear gloves. I mean, I can wear rubber gloves. I do that often, latex gloves, but the other gloves, and then the guy might come up to you and say, "Oh, you got to put the gloves on." It's like a lot of those rules I think are well made by well-meaning people, but they don't have any experience in the trade. I mean, this one job I went on, the it was ridiculous. The safety concerns were so high that you couldn't have a utility knife on the job unless it had automatic retractable blade. Like, have you ever worked like what? It's useless.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
That's technically the stance of the company that I work for as
yeah,
well.
it's like it's
Technically.
completely
But
useless. You had to have level 5 cut rate gloves, and how whatever level high vis. Um, there was a lot of just ridiculous things. They had it to the point where if you were working on a lift, right, a scissor lift, you couldn't work on the lift unless you had a spotter standing on the ground watching you. So you ended up having something like, especially like the electricians, where they're up on a lift. All of them are on a lift, and there's like 10 lifts on the job, or just in this one area. Now you have to have 20 guys working there, right? One guy in the lift, another guy watching the lift. It's like that's all made by people who have no experience in the trade. Or I wonder about that sometimes, and kind of, I don't know why I'm going there or why it's coming to mind, but it's interesting to me, like how people who aren't connected on the ground are making the rules for people who are, and then the people, for whatever reason it is, it's like sometimes I think well-meaning ideas are potentially harmful and can cost a lot of money, wasted money. I mean, these are all kind of strange things that are going through my mind when I'm on these jobs.
well, yeah, it's interesting because recently, not too long ago, we kind of had in my company some stuff come up about table saws, which table saw is just about the most dangerous tool you can probably you can use if you're not careful with it. And so somebody had gotten injured, and therefore there's a big emphasis. Everybody's got to make sure they have the guards on all the time, and like if you were found without the guard on your saw, like that would be um, a fireable offense. Um, which that's fine. I can understand that. But the funny thing is that in talking through some of this stuff and realizing, okay, I got to refresh these guys on the more importantly is knowing how to use the tool properly, because you could still hurt yourself with the guard on if you don't really know what to do. And if you don't use it improperly, if you know how to use the tool properly and you always make sure you follow the correct protocols, like what cuts are safe, what cuts are not safe, that's going to keep you a lot safer than the rule would, or like a little piece of plastic covering the thing. So I mean, I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to start this project, is because with stuff like that, safety pushes. Um, an attempt to kind of solve these problems through like making more rules and things like that. But really, what's most necessary is the knowledge and the wisdom that people used to just take for granted. Um, and of course, there's always people that are going to do foolish things. They're going to hurt themselves. But the way to operate safely in was a very important part of the learning process. um, so that is an important thing. um, okay, so you had mentioned that it was actually kind of on one of the job sites there that you started talking to another guy, and he was kind of sharing with you about God and stuff like that. So that's something that you kind of picked up along the way. So why don't you tell a little bit about how that part of the story came about for you?
Well, uh, so I initially come uh, from a recovery background, and the background that I come from, there's a large emphasis on seeking God, um, and the emphasis there is a lot of like whatever makes sense to you, do that, and I know, like, especially in some of the circles I talk with, people are really afraid of that idea, which is understandable. to a degree. Um, so that's how I come across that. Now I had been um, seeking God for a few years. I didn't know really what that meant, but it was more seeking through pragmatic principles and some pragmatic actions that I could take, and that opened up a lot of doors. Because primarily, and maybe here's something that churches can keep in mind is people who are going to be coming into your church are closed off because of whatever reason. It may be justified or not, based on whatever you may think about this person. But I tend to think something like, I'm just going to trust God and trust that God has this person right where they want, or right where He wants them, and I'm not going to meddle too much in the process of forcing somebody into a particular way of thinking about God. So, because it's been my experience, my experience was I had got myself into a bind, uh, destroyed my life, and um, was given an opportunity to live differently and see the world differently and see my place in it differently. And so I started taking some suggestions, putting them into practical action. Um, I started to notice a change in how I seen the world and how I saw myself in the world. I started to notice that things weren't quite as difficult to get through. um, and I trusted when these people said, "Seek God." They would say something like, "I don't care what you believe. There's no requirement for belief, but seek God." And that would be a really high principle to have. And maybe in tandem with that would be try to see if God, whatever that is, will help make you more useful. And so that's what I did. And I didn't really think much about it because it's like I had a lot of resentments or perceptions about things like Christ and the church and things like that. And those things were really undeveloped ideas from when I was a kid and who had rebellious uh, perceptions and things like this. So I left the I wasn't raised in the church, but I left the Christ and church thing at the door for a long time. And so when it came time to have to change, I trusted people when they said it, the answer to your problem is going to be seek God. And we don't care what that is. Just do what you got to do. Seek Him. Maybe take all these other suggestions, put them into action, and watch what happens. And that's what happened. And so eventually I ended up um, running into this person who became my friend. I was at a conference with him, and that's where I met him. And there was a kinship there, and he had mentioned a book uh, 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 called Conversations with God, and I had read that book, and so there was a kinship there. Like, and that particular book um, is very strange book. Uh, I'm guessing most of the people who listen to this, if you read it, you'll probably hate the book. But for me, what it did was it blew the doors off of my resentments, and it softened me up enough to let God in a little more. So I really connected with this guy on that, and in that I built a friendship with him where we would talk about seeking God and helping others. And then eventually, when I came to work with him, he was all about this. I mean, he was talking about things like um, uh, practicing random acts of kindness and stuff like this. Now, I can I can already hear people listening to this channel or listening to this having their gripes about what that looks like, and based on their own perceptions. But I'll say, when you're in a position where you don't really have other options, but you're also kind of really resistant to particular ideas, those are some really great options to have. It's just enough. Sometimes just walking through, taking the actions, taking simple, spiritually principled actions. God does so much, and so that's what happened. I ended up working with him. It was a great time, man. It was. He helped me to work well with others, or more well with others, because that's always been a difficulty of mine, especially on a job site where you have a crew of 5 guys. You got 5 different opinions on how to do something. You have, all these different things. Um, it can still be difficult, but having somebody like this, as my, basically a mentor, a guy I really looked up to. He was 20 years older than I am, and I could see that he was, really connected in a way that I had hoped I could be. And so I really took a lot of what he said to heart, and we became very good friends. We're still really great friends. Um, I trust him. Uh, I don't know. He like a brother, or I can't really explain that more. I mean, it's like, and then, so that there's that, and eventually, uh, eventually I did end up, having a conversion experience, and I feel very connected. And, um, well, I guess you could say I'm Christian. I still, saying that to me is one of those things where I don't feel like it captures what it is I'm trying to say. We know what we're talking about. I'll just say, yeah, I'm Christian, um, but having, even though, like, he wouldn't say that he is a Christian, but we're still really connected. We still talk about God and helping others, and we both know we're talking about God. I don't question where he is in the hierarchy of, the heavens or whatever. None of that matters to me personally. So,
Yeah.
that's all very complicated. This thing keeps flickering. Is this okay, or is it just my end flickering?
I think it looks okay here. It's
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting. The Bible study at my church, we'd been reading a book called "The Normal Christian Life," and the author of "The Normal Christian Life," he says like something to the effect of like the normal Christian life is it's a kind of a thing that's it's normal, but it almost never happens, or it's extremely like the only person that really can do it is Jesus. And so I think whenever we want to say like to take the name of like saying there is we should always be approach that subject with great humility to say like I'm representing Jesus in some way by calling ourselves a Christian. It doesn't mean that we're going to perfectly reflect the way he lived his life, but um, nevertheless, the for everybody else, it's a lifestyle of trying, making mistakes, picking yourself back up, and realizing that he's walking with us to help us do it. And really, the emphasis that book says is it's really about the normal Christian life is when Christ lives through us. So he's the one that's really doing even the work of living our everyday. Um, so it was really cool that you mentioned there that this guy is an older guy and did act as a mentor towards you, and I think that that's one of the really important things about this concept that I'm working on here is that it doesn't even necessarily like sometimes we get really caught up on like, oh, I have to tell people this and this about the faith, maybe you have an opportunity to express it very clearly, maybe you don't, but your life and your example is still going to have an impact. And so he really helped you kind of get your life together, through his example. It seems like as much as just what he said, just the way he lived his life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of it is um, just sitting with somebody, spending time and laughing, sharing stories, sharing shortcomings,
Mm-hmm.
sharing mistakes, sharing victories. All those different kinds of things have been um, were really impactful to me because I knew he was telling the truth, and
Yeah.
and the other thing is about that, I think some of the best mentors I know are great storytellers, and that's huge. I uh, he also helped me learn how to just talk with people, which is still kind of difficult. Like so this new job I have to I go into the job and it's a home. It's already people are living there. Um, I don't always feel super comfortable um, talking with the homeowners. Like I still kind of feel like uh, socially awkward. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something to kind of work through. I've never been great at just banter with strangers. That's a
Yeah.
thing. If you're in the trades, I think banter is a huge thing in the trades. Guys are really good at doing that. If you're real comfortable with the guys, I think there's a kinship there in banter. That's always been something difficult for me. And um, but the more I get to practice some of that, is the better. All of that goes into a more making a more meaningful day.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to think, wow, I really did a great job putting that wall together and putting that, tiling that shower. But man, that other guy was a real asshole. Like, and then I think, why couldn't I just get along? Now that whole, I can, this other guy I'm working with could, and my inability to work well with him can taint my whole day, even though I can do the work just fine. But like my days and weeks and months and years can get really long if I don't figure out how to work well with people. That's a difficult thing
Yeah.
to do. Um, so it's constant battle trying to become become more useful, become more understanding, become more of a worker of work with workers. Um, so yeah, that's a super difficult thing to do. It's and a, a lot of like the Christian life, I think, is, or these principles, um, that they can help with a lot of that stuff, but it's still difficult.
Um. So that's a okay. So I guess there you're talking about your faith life can have a positive impact on your work, and how do you think your oh my gosh, how does your work life, how does that affect the way you approach your faith,
Hmm.
or what have you
Well,
learned kind of from that?
well, in the field that I'm in, so I do work a lot by myself. So in a practical way, I've spent a long time listening to different books and things like this, and so I guess acquiring um, knowledge. I guess it's a kind of a weak point. I don't really like to lean on that too much, but like getting more familiar with um, different pieces of literature, spiritual literature, has been helpful. And for some reason, I'm the kind of guy where I'll have difficulty actually reading a book. Like if
Mm-hmm.
I actually read a book, it makes me want to go to sleep. so I have to really, like, unless it's something that is really engaging, right? But I can listen to audiobooks all day long. And so getting familiar with different literature or different thinkers who talk about this different kinds of stuff. I can remember what job I was on based on what book it was I was listening to, you know, and which is interesting. Um, let's see other ways that work has affected my faith. That's a hard question to answer. I guess the most practical thing I could say about it from like an experience, a place of experiences, like looking at where I was 10 years ago versus where I am now, and being able to look at how I felt about things 10 years ago, how I saw the world 10 years ago, how I thought, what I thought about God, what I thought about faith, what I thought about injustice, what I thought about all sorts of things versus where I'm today. I can kind of track along the way when I'm able to look back and see how things have transformed. Like that's, and then gratitude for the life that I have today, and that's an incredible thing in itself. There's things in my life that the life that I have right now is so far outside of the realm of what I would have considered, first of all, desirable, second, achievable. And so, I don't know, I guess, so how does my work life affect my faith today? It's like, I don't know, like, I think it's, for me, faith in life and growth in this is, it's constant. It's a constantly growing thing. Sometimes old ideas drop off, new stuff comes in. I don't know. It's ever changing. I don't know how better to answer that.
Well, I think that's
Yeah,
all great. Yeah, that's good stuff. I mean, my always think I just I like asking that question because, like one thing I like about or the way I kind of think about it is that sometimes when it comes to stuff, spiritual things or like the kind of philosophical aspect of it, it's so easy to get like way disconnected from everything, or it just gets so like abstract that it kind of doesn't make it's just hard to like kind of hold your thoughts in your head in a way that makes sense. But when I have to work with my hands building things, it's like that needs to work, it needs to make sense, it needs to function. And I see that as like this is a part of the world that God created. He made it to work and function, and it's like electricity works the same every day. Trees still grow up and down, like you can't like bend the laws of nature, um, or else we wouldn't be able to do our jobs. And so I always just kind of rely on that kind of gives me a hope of, it's like, okay, maybe I don't understand exactly how all these great mysteries work, but I know they still got to function. It's still got to kind of work. It's still got to make sense. um
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would spin my wheels for decades trying to puzzling myself over the mystery of things. Why? It's like,
mhm.
and for me, the conversion experience I have, I describe it as being captured by Christ, because it was like I wasn't looking for that. It wasn't something I set out to do. I wasn't trying to become a Christian or anything like that. And and one of the things that would prevent me um, from becoming a church member or anything like that was, um, how do you answer the question about virgin birth or the resurrection or or why would God do the flood and Noah, like all this ridiculous stuff, and then being really anxious about trying to have the answers so that I can believe something. And that was a real block for me. Like it was like I can't answer it, and therefore I can't understand it, and therefore um, this is points of contention, and with not only a restlessness inside of me, but like being disgruntled with other people or traditions. And then one day I had um, I had been seeking God for, like I said, for like 10 years, and a God that makes sense to me, I guess. And what that was all that was the principle of seeking God. So that was the path I was on. And one day, um, I realized that this path had been kind of reaching the end of its rope, and I'm like, I have to. This is kind of, it's falling, like I'm running out of gas here, and I feel like there needs to be something more. Otherwise, I don't know, man. Something, there has to be more to this. And so, um, I had realized that maybe I hadn't. I definitely haven't. I what the thing that came to my mind was, the question I had was, how is it really that these Christians can like believe this stuff? And um, and so one day I realized maybe I should just maybe read the Bible or something to figure out what it is that they believe and how they believe, because it doesn't make any damn sense to me. But whatever, might as well see what happens. So I go, and that same friend that I worked with, he told me several years back, he said, if you ever read the Bible, read the just read the red words. And so I knew what that meant. That was apparently there was a Bible with the red words, and the red words were Jesus's words. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll look up. Maybe, and I was at work one day, and I thought, I wonder if there's a book out there like that. So I searched um, only words that Jesus said, and I looked in YouTube for that, and a video came up called "The Complete Sayings of Jesus Christ in Chronological Order." And it was an audiobook from a book that was written in 1927, and I actually have the book here. I ended up buying it because it's interesting to me. But so I'm listening to this book, and I'm fixing somebody's silicone. I'm doing a punch list on the job, which means I'm going through every one of these bathrooms in this courthouse to cut out the caulk that the guy did, and I'm putting a new caulk. And I'm listening to this audiobook, and it's scripture. And I'm listening, I'm like, this is really interesting. Like, the first thing I noticed was the first miracles that Christ was doing, he was telling people not to tell people that what he was doing. And I was like, I never knew that about him. Because I thought, what kind of spiritual leader is supposed to be humble, but he's telling people that I'm the way? So I was like really bothered by that. So I'm listening to this book, and that's the first thing that, like, the first chink in the armor. And the second, so I'm listening, I'm like, this is very interesting. And then I get to a story in Mark 5 about this dude named Legion. And I heard that whole story, and I pressed stop on the audiobook, and I was like, what the heck was that, dude? And I pressed rewind, and I listened to it again. And as soon as the story was done, all the questions that I had about virgin birth, all these mysterious questions, all went away. They just went away. And I've not yet been bothered by him since. And I was like, that's why I say I was like I had this moment where I'm captured by Christ. It was out of my will. I don't know how I went from disbelief to belief, and like this, it has nothing to do. It was out of my hands, and from there, when I get a hold of something, I really get a hold of it. I started going to a church um, that it was fine. I ended up getting baptized there, and that was great. Um, and then it was just a weird church. I ended up not sticking around because I think there was theological issues with some of my background that they. And I was like, you guys can do what you want. I'm cool with it. I just don't want nothing to do with it. I'm gonna go. And so I invited my wife now. I said, hey, are you interested in actually checking out a church with me? And she said, sure. um, and she had read C.S. Lewis and everything, and I was always kind of like this weirdo. Like I liked books like Conversations with God, or there's a story called The Egg by Andy Weir, which I thought was always interesting. There's just like these interesting spiritual parables that I always believed have a lot of truth in them, and they really helped me. My wife always thought that was really weird about me. She like read a bunch of, like, she was reading Ravi Zacharias and all sorts of stuff, and so she had no problem with it. So we start going to a church. It was good. Then we ended up leaving that church because there was some strange issues that happened there, and um, we ended up buying a house in 2021, and we found a church that was close to home. It's a Lutheran church, and it's been there 150 years. There's 200 people there. There's families. There's some very old people. There's some young families there. There's school there, and we became members. And now I'm getting involved with they have me like on a committee, like a stewardship and finance, all this strange stuff. It's like, what has happened,
Yeah.
But it's like that's my experience with God. It's like if I honestly just kind of, as much as I can, take my hands off the wheel and just put one foot in front of the other and continue to seek Him, that part has never changed.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily enough, I believe that Christ. I have enough faith in Him that I he'll he says to me, stray whichever way you want. It's fine. I'm right here with you, and which means I have faith that I won't stray too far. The big thing was, like I said, in that conversion experience, all of the mysteries, the answers to the mysteries, the desire for the answers to the mysteries vanished, and therefore they get to remain a mystery, which to me is a very good gift. That's where they belong, and I believe that they are true. I don't know what that means though, right? But I believe that because they're mysteries, like there's so much power in that, especially somebody who's creative, like working like in the fields that we work in, or with music or writing or any of that stuff. The mystery there serves all of that, and it makes it so big and amazing. It's not big and daunting. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the point of it. It's really weird.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really. I mean, it's a great to hear. I know I've heard you share a lot of that story before, but it's a great story. It doesn't get old to hear about just that way, and it's funny because I know exactly like not my like conversion, I would say, but like I can just in the same way remember like I was in this house and like God said something to me. I had to like go find a closet and like pray because like it's like it's weird how you have those moments and you remember like exactly like what you were doing and what you were working on and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so this is kind of I mean I don't know people have different answers to this so it's kind of fun but I just kind of want to know what different people think but like what do you think now that you've been a Christian longer, and more specifically thinking about Jesus and the Bible, like, have you meditated on the concepts or whatever that Jesus was a carpenter, or it's it's often translated carpenter, but it could be just like a craftsman of some sort. Jesus was, and Joseph was. Have you ever really thought about that, or has that resonated with you?
Um, well, of course, I've thought about it, um, but it hasn't. I guess the time where it was kind of that idea really was most impactful is when I heard about this guy Jordan Peterson said that it's no mistake that he was a carpenter
Hmm.
or a craftsman, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like he's the builder, the creator of the universe, all this stuff, and um, so yeah, I mean, if I did meditate on that, I even just now just thinking about like we were talking about with when I walk into a job, I could see the steps ahead of time, what I should be, what has to come out, what has to go in, all that. I'm in complete awe of the power of God, and like uh, that stuff. Like in some sense, that statement is so far above my pay grade that I shouldn't even begin to touch it because like I'm kind of a weirdo. Like I'll think about like what it takes to make this table possible,
Hmm.
right? And more than just what it took to be a craftsman to craft this table, but like the skills it takes for the people who taught me and the people that taught them and so on. It's like we're all in this together, right? So that we could talk about this table right here, which will be now a part of of the 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 ether of conversations for until YouTube goes away and whatever. So that's all interesting. Now, as far as craftsmanship goes, I can tell you a quick story on. Have you ever been struck by in awe by a piece of or uh, architecture? Like so, this happened not too long after my conversion experience. Um, I had been working at this, doing some hallways, some wainscot tile at a hallway at this church in the past, and I was called back to do another section of the church, and I did that section of the church. It wasn't in the church; it was in a school portion of the church, so I never saw the church itself. And so they called me back to do another section of the church, and it's like 5 in the morning. I get was about 5:30 in the morning. I get to the job, and the the Abbey, I think it's Abbey George. He says, "All right, walk through here with me. Follow me. We're going to go into the where the job's at." So I grab my tool bucket, and he opens the door, and I walk in, and it's a Catholic church, and I'm like literally like I didn't know what to expect, dude. I walk in there, and I'm just like it hits me. I was like in awe, dude. I was like, my goodness. It was like walking into uh, an alive painting. I mean, it was like I'm not looking for that. Like I just was trying to go into the hallway where I need to put tile, and I'm struck by
Hmm.
the beauty of this thing that is in a way that was very powerful. And then I started researching this particular history of this church, and they had it was built. Uh, if anybody wants to know, go look up Saint Stanislaus in Milwaukee. There's some videos on YouTube that talk about the history of this church and how it was built. It was built by Polish people, immigrants, with their own money and their own hands. They, didn't hire out. I mean, this is a gorgeous, gorgeous church. And then Vatican II happened, and they whitewashed everything. They put carpet in the sanctuary, and poured like 11 inches of concrete in there to get rid of the altar, so everything was the same height. It was really strange, but so then that's all in the history of this. And by the time I get there, they had remodeled a bunch of it and repainted everything. It was completely I was completely awestruck. I don't know how to describe it. Um, but it was kind of terrifying. He's like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, dude. And people poured their lives into building this thing. And so as it relates to thinking about Jesus as a craftsman and a carpenter, it's like we're so far removed from um, uh, truly amazing architecture. It's hard to imagine the statement of Christ being a carpenter or a craftsman in some sense, because everything is flat and
Mm-hmm.
um, safe, and there's no um, dynamics in like everything is just and so yeah, I think if you have opportunities to go look at places that are truly beautiful, go allow yourself to be struck by the beauty of what God can do in the lives of people, what God can do in the communities, like just by like the physical things you could see. I mean, even like this, like a piece of plastic, it doesn't seem like much, but if you really follow it down, it's amazing what goes into making something like this possible. Or
Mm-hmm.
this little tab on the can. You would think that like that this thing is just an insignificant piece of aluminum, and in some sense it is. But in another sense, this is you can't even begin to understand how far down the rabbit trail of life in the realm of in this realm it is. And so I mean, yeah, a lot of this stuff is probably strange, but
Yeah.
I like having a mind like that. I have basically an artistic mind. It helps me to connect deeper. And I think to be an artist, there's something with craftsmanship, because I think I've heard you mention that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I can grab something real quick, just real quick. So during the pandemic, I was uh, I was kind of bored, and one day I was on the couch with my wife, and we had some Chinese food, and I got one of the um, chopsticks, and I had my utility knife for work, and I was just doodling around with it, and then I crafted something out of it and gave it to her as a joke, and she's like, "Oh, that's really cool," and she ended up getting me some blocks of wood and some um, uh, wood carving um, tools, and then I just like I went on a whole terror and carved a bunch of things, like 6 different things. Our old our old dog Ferris chewed up 4 of these things, so I have a couple of them left. But here's one of them.
Wow.
This is a like a flower that I carved. This was
Beautiful.
out of a little block of wood and a utility knife. And so there's that. That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
And then um, for our for my wife's, I think our 1 year anniversary as a boyfriend girlfriend, I wrote her a story and about um, 2 people who meet in a village who find um, these wells that heal people. And so then later on, when I started writing or doing these crafts where I'm carving wood. I ended up carving her like
Oh,
this little well.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So it's
So,
kind of fun. And I don't have any experience carving, but that's the other thing. I don't think you have to have experience to begin with a
mhm.
lot of stuff. Just jump in and when in the Bible it talks about childlike faith. There's a lot of childlike faith that goes into carving something like this. It's not having the answers. It's just jumping in and having fun. I mean, when we were kids, we would go out in the woods and build forts and play cops and robbers and stuff. All of that's childlike faith. Nobody's asking questions about why you're the robber or why you're the cop or why does the fort have to be like this. We're just doing it. And so there's something to that I get to tap into when I'm not taking it too seriously to the point where I need to have all the answers. And so I don't know if that's helpful, but that's been extremely helpful for me in seeking God and trying to really tap into and really embrace the gifts that God has given us to enjoy this thing that we get to call life. That who knows if we get another? I don't know, man. It doesn't matter to me. I have this one. Let's try to have as much experience as possible. So,
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm out of time for the day, but this is definitely an awesome conversation, and I think that a lot of people will get a lot of great stuff out of it. So we'll probably have to do it again, and because we just kind of scratched the surface with some of this stuff. But thank you so much for talking with me today.
oh, thank you. I love what you're doing, man. And if I can be of any more use to you, let me know.
All right.
So,
Thank you. Talk to you later.
later.
If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and check the links below in the description for other ways that you can get involved and help. Thank you.